Ed Sullivan, stood in the wings of CBS Studio 50, watching Dean Martin stumble through his soundcheck with growing alarm. It was October 1965, and the once mighty entertainer looked like a shadow of his former self. Dean's partnership with Jerry Lewis had ended in bitter acrimony 8 years earlier. His movie career had stalled, and his drinking had become the subject of industry gossip. Ed's producers had warned him against booking Dean, calling him box office poison and a has-been living off past glory. But what happened in the next 12 minutes would not only resurrect Dean Martin's career, it would teach Ed Sullivan that sometimes the most broken performers create the most beautiful moments. Before you hear this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the night when America's most powerful TV host took the biggest gamble of his career on a man everyone else had written off. To understand why Ed Sullivan was so conflicted about booking Dean Martin in 1965, you need to understand how far Dean had fallen from his peak. In the early 1950s, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were the biggest comedy team in America. Their nightclub acts were legendary, their movies were box office gold, and their appearances on Ed's show had generated some of the highest ratings in television history. But by 1956, the partnership had become toxic. Jerry's manic energy and need for control clashed with Dean's laid-back personality and desire for creative independence. Their final performance together was painful to watch. Two men who clearly couldn't stand each other going through the motions of comedy that had lost all joy. When they split in July 1956, industry wisdom said Jerry Lewis would thrive as a solo act while Dean Martin would fade into obscurity. Jerry was considered the talent, the creative force, the star. Dean was just the straight man, the handsome singer who fed Jerry's setup lines. For the next 9 years, that prediction seemed accurate. Jerry Lewis became a major movie star, directing and starring in successful comedies that made him wealthy and famous worldwide. Dean, meanwhile, struggled to find his identity as a solo performer. His early solo movies were largely forgettable. His recording career was inconsistent. His nightclub performances, while technically competent, lacked the spark that had made the Martin and Lewis shows electric. Industry insiders whispered that Dean Martin without Jerry Lewis was like a song without a melody. Ed Sullivan had watched Dean's career decline with genuine sadness. He remembered the magic Dean had brought to his show during the partnership years, not just as Jerry's foil, but as a genuinely talented entertainer with a smooth voice and natural charisma. But by 1965, booking Dean Martin on The Ed Sullivan Show seemed like a career mistake. "Ed, I have to advise against this," his head producer said during a booking meeting in September 1965. "Dean Martin is yesterday's news. His last 3 movies flopped. His TV variety show was canceled after 1 season. And frankly, his drinking problem is becoming an embarrassment. We book him, and people will think we're desperate for guests." But Ed had been thinking about Dean differently. He'd seen the pain in Dean's eyes during their last conversation, the exhaustion of someone who'd spent nearly a decade trying to prove he was more than just Jerry Lewis's straight man. Ed understood the pressure of having to reinvent yourself in public, of living down to other people's diminished expectation. Sometimes, Ed told his staff, the greatest performances come from people who have nothing left to lose. The booking decision was complicated by another factor: Dean's drinking. It was an open secret in Hollywood that Dean's casual relationship with alcohol had become less casual over the years. He'd always been known for his martini-fueled persona, but friends worried that the drinking was becoming a way to cope with career disappointments and personal loneliness. Ed's insurance company was nervous about having Dean on a live broadcast. "What if he shows up drunk?" they asked. "What if he forgets lyrics, stumbles, embarrasses himself on national television?" Ed had similar concerns. But he also remembered something Dean had told him years earlier. "The stage is the only place I feel completely sober, even when I'm not." The call went out to Dean's agent. The Ed Sullivan Show would book Dean Martin for a solo appearance, his first major television booking in over 2 years. The fee was modest, the slot was late in the show, and the expectations were low. It was charity disguised as opportunity. Dean's reaction to the booking was characteristically understated. "Sullivan still wants me?" he asked his agent. "That's either very generous or very stupid of him." The week leading up to the appearance, Ed found himself second-guessing the decision constantly. He read entertainment industry reports about Dean's recent performances, most of them lukewarm. He watched footage from Dean's canceled TV show, looking for signs of the spark that had once made Dean special. "Maybe we should have a backup plan," his assistant suggested. "Another singer ready to go on if Dean can't perform." Ed considered this seriously. He'd never had to use a backup performer before, but Dean's unpredictability made it a real possibility. 3 days before the broadcast, Ed made an unexpected decision. He would visit Dean personally, not at his agent's office or a professional setting, but at Dean's home in Beverly Hills. Ed wanted to see for himself whether Dean Martin was still capable of the magic that had once made him irresistible. Dean's house was elegant, but felt empty, like a stage set waiting for actors who might never arrive. When Dean answered the door, Ed was struck by how tired he looked, not just physically but spiritually. The easy confidence that had once been Dean's trademark seemed forced, brittle. "Mr. Sullivan," Dean said with his characteristic smooth voice, "you didn't have to come all the way out here. I'm not that important anymore." That comment, delivered without self-pity, just matter-of-fact resignation, broke Ed's heart. This was a man who had entertained millions, who had been one half of the biggest comedy team in America, who had genuine talent but had been beaten down by years of trying to prove his worth. They sat in Dean's living room, and Ed asked the question that had been troubling him. "Dean, are you ready for this? Really ready? Because if you're not, we can postpone. Find another time." Dean poured himself a drink. It was 2 p.m. and looked at Ed with surprising directness. "Ed, I've been ready my whole life. The question is whether America is ready for Dean Martin without Jerry Lewis, without the safety net, without the comedy to hide behind. Just me, singing songs, trying to connect with people." "What songs are you planning to perform?" Ed asked. "I thought everybody loves somebody, and maybe the door is still open to my heart." Dean replied, "Both from my new album. Neither one's been a big hit, but they feel right for where I am now." Ed knew both songs. They were good, but they weren't obvious showstoppers. They were mature, slightly melancholic, the kind of songs that required emotional connection rather than technical virtuosity. "Dean," Ed said carefully, "those are beautiful songs, but they're not typical Sullivan show material. They're subtle. They require the audience to really listen." Dean smiled for the first time since Ed had arrived. "Ed, I'm 48 years old. I'm tired of trying to be something I'm not. If I'm going to fail, I want to fail as myself." Ed recognized something in Dean's voice that he hadn't heard in years. Not desperation or bravado, but quiet determination. This wasn't a man asking for charity. This was an artist ready to risk everything on his own terms. Sunday night, October 17, 1965. The Ed Sullivan Show went live to the nation. Ed did his opening monologue, introduced the first guests, maintained his usual professional demeanor while privately wondering if he was about to witness either a resurrection or a career funeral. Dean was scheduled late in the show, after the headliner but before the closing act. It was a slot reserved for acts Ed believed in, but wasn't sure the audience was ready for. Backstage, Dean was surprisingly calm. He'd had a few drinks, enough to settle his nerves but not enough to impair his performance. He looked at himself in the dressing room mirror and saw a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone except himself. Ed found Dean in the dressing room 20 minutes before his slot. "How are you feeling?" Ed asked. "Like a man who's about to find out if he still has a career," Dean replied. "Thanks for giving me the chance to find out." Finally it was time. Ed walked to his mark, looked directly into the camera, and delivered his introduction with uncharacteristic warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, a very talented performer who's been entertaining America for many years. Please welcome Dean Martin." The applause was polite but reserved. The audience knew who Dean was, but they weren't sure what to expect from him as a solo performer. Dean walked onto the stage with the relaxed confidence that had always been his trademark. But there was something different about him now. He seemed more present, more focused, less hidden behind the casual persona that had sometimes made him seem disengaged. He positioned himself at the microphone, looked out at the audience and began singing "Everybody Loves Somebody." Within the first few notes, something magical happened. Dean's voice, always technically proficient, now carried an emotional weight that hadn't been there during his partnership years. He sang about love and loneliness, and the universal human need for connection, and every word felt personal, authentic, earned through experience. Ed watched from the wings, amazed by what he was seeing. This wasn't the Dean Martin who had coasted on charm and good looks during the Lewis years. This was a mature artist who had been broken down and rebuilt, who was using his pain to fuel his performance. The studio audience felt it too. They stopped chatting, stopped rustling programs, stopped checking their watches. They were listening, really listening, to a man pouring his heart out through a love song that felt like both a celebration and a lament. When Dean reached the chorus, "Everybody loves somebody sometime," his voice carried a mixture of hope and resignation that was devastating in its honesty. This wasn't a young man singing about love's possibilities. This was a middle-aged man who had lost love, found it again, lost it again, and was still hoping for one more chance. The song ended to sustained applause that was qualitatively different from the polite acknowledgement Dean had received when he walked on stage. This was appreciation, recognition, respect. During the brief musical interlude, Ed approached Dean at the microphone. "That was beautiful, Dean, really beautiful." Dean nodded, slightly out of breath, emotionally spent from the performance. "One more, Ed. Let me give them one more." "The door is still open to my heart" was even more powerful than the first song. Dean sang about regret, about chances lost and found, about the courage it takes to remain vulnerable after you've been hurt. His voice cracked slightly on certain notes, not from technical failure but from emotional honesty. Ed found himself thinking about his own life, his own losses, his own moments of doubt. This was what great performance was supposed to do. Make the audience see their own experience, reflected in the artist's vulnerability. When the second song ended, the studio audience erupted in applause that went on and on. They were on their feet, not just applauding Dean's performance, but recognizing his courage, his willingness to expose himself emotionally on national television. Ed walked onto the stage with genuine enthusiasm. "Dean Martin, ladies and gentlemen, that was absolutely magnificent." Dean shook Ed's hand, his eyes slightly wet with tears he was trying to hide. "Thanks, Ed. Thanks for believing in me when nobody else would." After the cameras stopped rolling, Ed found Dean in his dressing room, sitting quietly, still processing what had just happened. "Dean," Ed said, "I owe you an apology. I booked you tonight because I felt sorry for you, because I remembered what you used to be. But what you gave us tonight wasn't nostalgia. It was something completely new. You found your voice." Dean looked up with a slight smile. "Ed, I've been singing for 25 years. Tonight was the first time I felt like myself doing it." The immediate aftermath of Dean's Sullivan appearance was extraordinary. By Monday morning, radio stations were playing "Everybody Loves Somebody." Record stores were ordering Dean's album. Nightclub owners suddenly wanted to book Dean Martin's solo. But more than commercial success, something had shifted in how people saw Dean. The Sullivan performance revealed an artist hidden beneath the casual persona for years. This wasn't Jerry's straight man. This was a genuine artist with something meaningful to say about love, loss, and human resilience. Within months, Dean's career was revitalized. "Everybody Loves Somebody" became a #1 hit, his first chart topper as a solo artist. His nightclub performances gained new depth and emotional resonance. More importantly, Dean's appearance changed how Ed thought about booking decisions. He realized he'd been too focused on commercial success, and not enough on artistic potential. Sometimes the most powerful television moments came from giving struggling artists platforms to reveal themselves authentically. Years later, when Dean became a major TV star with his own variety show and joined Sinatra's Rat Pack, he always credited that 1965 Sullivan appearance as the turning point. "Ed Sullivan saved my career that night," Dean said in 1975. "Not by giving me a job, but by giving me a chance to find out who I was as a performer. He took a risk when I was box office poison, And he let me be honest on his stage. Ed, reflecting on his career, often mentioned Dean's performance as one of his most satisfying booking decisions. Dean taught me that the greatest entertainment comes from people who have something real to say because they've lived it. The audience can tell the difference between performance and truth. The story demonstrates the power of believing in people when they can't believe in themselves. Ed's willingness to risk booking a performer everyone else had written off resulted in one of television's most emotionally powerful musical moments. It shows how personal crisis can become artistic transformation when someone has the platform to express it honestly. Dean's career disappointments gave him emotional depth his earlier performances had lacked. Most importantly, it reminds us that redemption stories are often the most compelling. The audience wasn't just watching Dean sing Day. They were watching a man find his way back to himself. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and tell us, have you ever given someone a second chance when everyone else had given up? Sometimes the most broken people create the most beautiful art.